So the talk tonight is called 2 Steps to Wholeness. So in the interest of anyone who needs to leave early, I'll just give you the 2 steps right up front. So the 2 steps are recognition of our innate awareness as being that which we are. That's step 1. Step 2 is the recognition that all form arises within that awareness, and as such is not ultimately other than the awareness. That's it. Okay, it's actually quite simple, and being simple is probably one of the reasons that it's so easily dismissed. It's because our mind likes that which is complicated and obscure and difficult. And in this case, what this spiritual path, in a very simplistic way of speaking about it, is direct, ever present, and couldn't be other than what it is. So we miss it, not because it is difficult to understand, or that we haven't done enough sittings, or that we haven't had the right experiences yet. We don't miss it for those reasons. We miss it because we're looking in a direction other than where it is, other than where it can be found. So when we can look directly at our own experience, it can save us a great deal of time. The journey can actually be relatively straightforward. It can still drag us through all kinds of things, but it's much, much more efficient when we're looking in a direction where it can be found. It's obvious, right? Okay, so one of the meditation methods that's gotten quite popular over the last few years is mindfulness. And this is a useful meditation technique. And as I'm sure you all know, that this is where a particular object is selected to be the subject of focus. And the object can be a physical object outside of ourselves, maybe a picture, could be a word, it could be some virtue that's can be focused, something that's aspirational. It can be an object like a flame. It can be a repeated word. And any of those things can be used as the object of our focus, right? And then if our mind wanders, which it will, then we can gently bring our mind back to the object of our focus. So this technique has value, right? It has value in terms of teaching the mind to be able to focus on a single thing for extended periods of time, to be able to do that well, to be able to concentrate, to be able to focus our energy. This has usefulness. It also has the ability to calm our mind, calm our body. It's good for the body. So these are all benefits. But the method of this type of mindful meditation is that the focus is on the object, whatever that object may be. So you could say it's an object-oriented meditation. So we can do that for a while, and like I say, it has value. It has great value, particularly if we have a restless mind. But at some point, we might begin to wonder if our attention is on the object, Where's the subject? Where is the one that's meditating on the object? And normally, if you ask someone that, their response is, well, it's me, of course. What a silly question. Of course it's me. I'm the subject. Right? The only difficulty is when we actually try to pinpoint what we mean by me. What's that? Right? So if, let's just say, the object of our focus in mindful meditation is the breath. So the body's breathing. We're focused on the breath. If the body is what we're focused on, the body is the object. It's not the subject. So the subject in that case isn't the body. It's got to be something else. And then we could say, well, it must be the mind, the thinking mind. It's my intention to focus on the breath. What happens when our mind isn't thinking about the breath? What happens when it's not thinking about anything? When it just takes a little breather for a few seconds. Where's the subject then? So we can see pretty quickly that the subject can't be this thinking mind that jumps around to all different, everything, right? And anything that it can think of, it will. So if it's jumping around like that, it can't be considered our core identity. There must be something else. And so when we've eliminated, the body and we've eliminated the thinking mind, we quickly get to an area where it becomes very difficult to say where exactly this me is. Where's this subject? Where's this entity that is meditating on this object? If we have an object, there must be a subject, something that is aware of the object. Right? But when we go trying to pinpoint that in our own head, let's say, or in our body or heart chakra or somewhere else, Dantian or wherever we choose to look, we find it very difficult to pinpoint that. We can do it conceptually, right? We can do it because we've heard that that's the right answer. But when we actually try to feel into it, where exactly is this subject of my experience, whatever that experience is, it becomes notoriously hard to find. If we go looking for it in earnest, in our own direct experience, rather than conceptually. So what we are left with is just this innate capacity that we all have to be aware of whatever's happening. Whatever's happening on the outside, whatever we see, hear, touch, whatever's happening on the inside, think, feel, sense. And there's something that's aware of all of that. So there can be this discovery. We can approach it even conceptually like that. But there is actually a movement that's much deeper than that, where there's a real whole body recognition that, that awareness that's always present, has always been present. We've missed it because we were looking at objects, not at what was looking. So it's really just turning our attention around to see what's looking rather than waiting to find that exceptional, hoped for, desired object in an experience or a state of mind or a feeling, a high state, an upwelling feeling, mystical experience. So we can see that all of those are objects, something that appears within this field of awareness that we notice, right? So whether it's a euphoric feeling, a profound understanding, mystical experience, uh, all of those things are the next arising within awareness. So we can be focused on the content, or we can be focused on that within which all of that content happens. Two very different things. But these body minds have been trained so thoroughly that we are focused on the object, whatever that object is. That's what's fascinating. This awareness, it's always been there, so we tend to take it for granted, if we even recognize it at all. So what we can notice is that this awareness has not only the ability to notice objects that appear within awareness, it has the ability to be aware of itself, be aware of itself independent of objects. Yeah, so in that sense, objects require awareness, but awareness doesn't require objects. Objects can be there or not be there. When we just drop back into awareness, absent of any objects, absent of thought, feeling subsides for the moment. The outside phenomena don't pull our attention in that direction, and there's just a resting in this awareness. So awareness doesn't require the object. So the other characteristic of this awareness is that it is formless, right? It doesn't have a physical, objectified form, so we can't really go looking for awareness with our mind, because what mind is used to looking for is objects, the physicality of the object. And in this case, the awareness doesn't have a physicality, it doesn't have a form, it doesn't have a shape or size, etc. And it's also what is ultimately looking. So it, we can't see it as an object any more than our eyeball can see itself, or a knife can cut itself, because it is itself what is looking. So as the mind tries to grapple with that, tries to find awareness, all it's left with is conceptualization. And in the meantime, the awareness is perfectly fine. It's happening. It's watching the mind do its little gyrations, and is present for that also, without judgment. Right. So one other thing that I wanted to mention about the awareness is that it has this quality of self-luminosity. It's not a lifeless, formless presence. It's a live presence. It illuminates that within its field, much like the sun does to other objects in the universe. In other words, during the daytime, the sun is shining. It lights up the landscape. The sun isn't trying to do that. It's not trying. It doesn't have the intention to do that. It's not doing it for a purpose. It's just its nature to do that. So the sun is self-luminous in that sense when we're talking about light, sunlight. Right? It is its own light. It doesn't require, the sun doesn't require a spotlight to see it. It is its own light. And in that same way, awareness is self-luminous. in the case of awareness, the light is the light of consciousness. When they talk about be a light unto yourself, that's what they're talking about. So light is often used in spirituality. It's not a physical light. It's not seen as a flame. It can be imagined as anything, of course, like anything else. But what it really points to is just this luminous capacity of awareness to bring, basically to light up the landscape in the same way or similar way that the sun lights up the physical landscape. Brings life to the world of form. Okay, so so we can talk about this, but one of the things that as humans we've been so conditioned to believe that what's important is the world of form, right? These bodies, that's what's fundamental, right? And when we talk about the formless or spirit or awareness or consciousness, well, that seems a little tenuous, right? A little fuzzy, a little, not sure how much we should depend on that, so we're conditioned to depend on this form, my body. This is what's important, so even though we all know that, the body has a shelf life and, one day it will cease to be, even still, we're willing to, bet on that option more than formlessness. That's how strong the conditioning are. We'll bet on the entity that is ultimately doomed versus what is the other possibility, which is that which was never born, which is the awareness. That which is just simply not of the world of form. Doesn't have the characteristics of form, and it's not subject to coming and going. It doesn't have a duration. It doesn't change over time. Alive, vibrant, but not changing. Not changing because it's always in the present moment, which is also always the present moment. Okay, so this looking at what we essentially are, we're still talking about step one, the recognition of our essence as being awareness. So it's hindered, that step one is hindered by a couple of things. One is that there's a belief that it is not here, not present, not now, right? Maybe in the future, sometime distant, when other circumstances happen, maybe then, but it's not present here now. So it's a denial of whatever may exist now. And if we're talking about our essence, whatever that essence is must be present in all moments, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be essential. It would just be, maybe it's there, maybe it's not, but not essential. But if we're talking about our very existence, it would seem that whatever that is must be present at all moments. But if that belief is that it's not here now, that what we need to do is improve ourselves, we need to sit more, we need to have more experiences, and then maybe then, when those conditions are met, then we'll be able to touch into our true nature. But we can see that all of those things, like self-improvement and more meditation and more experiences, will result in what? more objects appearing within the field of awareness at some later date. But we believe that those are the more desirable objects. Those are the objects that will fulfill, right? You know, the enlightenment experience, that explosive moment, you know, will improve our way to perfection. And then, but these are all just imagining that, you know, that by contriving the right set of conditions at some point in the future, that will satisfy the requirements to recognize what we are. But in the meantime, awareness is watching that whole struggle, the whole struggle to assemble a different set of conditions that's present now based on our belief that that's what needs to happen. Okay, so that's the barrier. That's the barrier. That's one barrier. Okay. Another barrier is this other thing that we've heard about, particularly from Eastern religions, is that the destination of the spiritual journey is no self. You know, and just the sound of that, you know, we don't really like. We don't really like. And then there's words that are even scarier than that, like cessation or the void or emptiness or nothingness, right? All sort of imply that the end, you know, a vacuum at the end of this journey where everything that we took ourselves to be will cease to be. And, you know, the mind who we've entrusted to sort of be the judge of what's right and what's wrong for us, doesn't like that idea. You know, it likes the idea of the journey, the spiritual journey. It likes that idea. It just doesn't like the idea of no self. Right? And then, you know, words like emptiness, you know, it sounds like just a black hole, you know, it's where everything just vanishes into some sort of state of annihilation. Right? But it's not actually what the word emptiness means at all. It's a Mahayana word that is very specific, and it is a characteristic of form. And that characteristic points at form being empty of self-origination. In other words, what we see is always, what we see in the world of form is always the result of conditions that bring together a certain result. And an example is probably useful here. So if we have a seed, let's say a pine cone seed, and just on its own, it won't sprout. I mean, it needs moisture, it needs a certain temperature zone, it needs soil, it needs nutrients, it needs sunlight, and rain at the right times. And when all those conditions are met, you know, then the seed will sprout and grow. You know, without any one of those conditions, it won't. So the pine tree is a result of all of those prior conditions. So anything that we can look at, we can see that it's not, it doesn't have intrinsic existence. It has existence that's the result of all of the conditions that led up to its current form. You know, and we can look at these bodies and see the same thing is true. You know, without, you know, our parents, without the genetics, without the nurturing and nourishment as we're growing up, without being able to breathe air every few seconds and drink water several times a day and eat meals frequently, conditions wouldn't be such that these forms could continue to exist. So that's in a nutshell what emptiness is actually pointing to, just a sense of that all forms are dependent. Another term like nothingness also sounds scary, but the real meaning of that is not nothingness, it's really no thingness, right? Pointing to something other than thingness, so pointing to something other than just simply the object within our field of attention, pointing to what notices that, which is not a thing, no thingness. So what these words point to, and I agree that they have a sort of scary quality to them, which is, I think part of the intent of that is so that we don't attach, a favorable hope to some outcome that's not true, that's not real. Place our hopes on some sort of, future concrete existence outside of this formless awareness. Okay, so those kind of scary terms can put us off, like, I'm not going to know self, and the easiest way for the mind to avoid that is to scare ourselves, just to convince ourselves, like, you don't want to go there, just don't go there. And if we never look beyond the world of objects, we're always scared to look beyond the world of objects, we'll never get to what's noticing them. We'll never get to the heart of the matter. It's sort of like, in the Old Testament, they talk about, not to worship idols, and when they talk about idols, it's a, clay form or something, not to imbue that with, with some divine significance, right? But we do that all the time. We just do it with other objects. We do it with, scriptures and books and, the form of certain, ancient teachers. We do it with concepts. We do it with beliefs. We do it with all kinds of things. We're too sophisticated to do it with clay objects anymore, so we do it with, more sophisticated means. But it's still the same movement, idolizing the object rather than that which notices. Okay, so the third way we can avoid this recognition of our true nature is by conceptualizing it, thinking about it, thinking that we can arrive there by mental processes, by putting all the right concepts together, and then one day we'll have the perfect set of concepts, perfect set of beliefs that sort of, hold together and that we can believe in, and that will be sufficient. But that's just an avoidance, because we can either think about awareness or we can be that awareness and live from that awareness. But you can't do both at the same time. You can't be awareness and think about it. You're doing either one or the other. And thinking about awareness is a bit like, trying to grasp air in your hand. It's like the tighter that you squeeze, the harder you try to understand what that is. By squeezing your hand, the less air is in there, right? But if you just sort of relax and notice what's already present, then all of it's available, right? Nothing's excluded. An open hand doesn't exclude anything. So if we're focused on the object, like mindful meditation, you could say that's a narrowing of attention onto a single object, which again has benefits. But what we're also talking about here is a different approach, and that is to bring ourselves back to that subject that is aware of all objects. And we can say that that sort of awareness meditation is the expansiveness, not the narrow focus, but the expansiveness where nothing's excluded. Everything's allowed to be as it is. We're not trying to redirect anything. We're just bringing that attention back to that which notices. Okay, so one of the sort of puzzling things is that we can actually recognize this awareness and still not fully appreciate what it is. And by that I mean we can recognize it, we can visit it, we can enjoy it, we can be hopeful for returning to it, but we may not have recognized that it is what we are. So it's sort of a puzzling kind of position, and it's something that may take some time to just resolve, because it's easier to see it than it is to recognize, oh, that's what I am. We might recognize that conceptually even, and that's why it's so puzzling, because we can see it, that, yeah, that's got to be true, and yet it still doesn't feel like that's true. Anybody ever experienced that? Like, yeah, it's awareness, and I know it's fundamental, makes total sense, and yet it still feels like I'm here and it's there. And sometimes I go there and then I come back. So this step one is the abiding recognition that that is indeed what I am, right? So that might, the recognition of awareness might come sooner than the recognition of, oh, and that is indeed what I fundamentally am. It's the same movement. It just takes a little longer to fully penetrate this denser organism, seems like. Okay, so that's all step one, recognizing what we truly are. And then step two is resolving the matter of, yeah, but there's still this world of form, right? So there can be this, we could call it the ultimate duality being me as awareness and then everything else, right? And it feels, we can observe that. I mean, that's what awareness has the capacity to do, is to recognize that all of that is happening, and what's fundamental is this awareness, but what's all those things out there, including this body mind, what about it too? So it can be, as much of a relief it is to recognize this awareness, we can be confronted fairly quickly with this thing of, yeah, but what about wholeness then? What about unity? How does this all fit together? Where does the world of form fit into it? Doesn't seem like I can just ignore it. So how do we move with that? And it seems like with awareness, we can even approach it to a certain degree conceptually. We can talk about it. We can point to it. It's all functioning already. But when we talk about wholeness or unity, how do you talk about it? I mean, we're talking about the entirety now. How do you address that? So one thing that's important to recognize is that it's not unity as opposed to differences. By unity, it's not opposed to anything. It doesn't exclude anything, right? So we can say, well, the thinking mind likes to name, label, dissect, analyze, basically slice and dice, and look at all the pieces. That's what the thinking mind can do well. So that's not unity, right? No, it's actually, like I said, unity doesn't exclude anything. So it is the entirety of our experience. It's in the entirety of the potentiality of everything. So as Ramana said, it's one without a second. There's no. It's not creating a duality. It's just a name given for the nameless, right? The entirety of everything. Right? So how, when we're talking about everything, I mean, how do you go about sort of approaching that? And I'd suggest one of the difficulties is that we approach the question of wholeness from the position of separation. I'm here, I feel separate, how do I get to wholeness? And it feels like, me as this separate body mind, how can that be one with everything that I see? How's that even possible? And we can talk about it, physiologically, like we're, how dependent we are on food and water and air and warmth, and that's true. We're not separate in that way from the rest of existence, but that's not ultimately satisfying, as something to hang our hat on and say, well, okay, now I get unity, union with the divine. It's deeper than, yes, we're dependent on air and water and food, sure, but there's something deeper, and this sense of being separate from all of that, as long as there's a belief in that what I am is this body mind is vulnerable, right? It can feel like I'm in here and the world is out there, and the world doesn't always work out the way I want it to. Sometimes I can get hurt physically or emotionally. My pride can get hurt. So it feels like the world can be a dangerous place out there. It can also be a pleasurable place too, no doubt. But there can be almost an underlying sense of anxiety. It doesn't have to be, overt, but it can be sort of background, like I just don't feel quite at home in the world. Feels a bit like I'm a stranger in a strange land, somehow out walking around impersonating an adult. And so how's that divide resolved? And we can't get there by thinking. We can't get there about, let's all get along and be nice and love each other. That also, it's a nice thought, but doesn't really get to the heart of the matter. So I'd suggest one of the fundamental questions is this belief in the primacy of this body mind. That's really the issue. Because if that's what we take ourselves to be, then the world does feel like a challenging place to be. We can, see other people, or we can see the earth as, maybe an asset, maybe a liability. It all depends. Maybe we'll do okay today, maybe not. It's it's sort of up in the air. If what we take ourselves to be is limited to this form, then it is at risk, and we are vulnerable, and that sense is inescapable. We can try to escape it. We can live in gated communities and accumulate some wealth and have the right friends, etc. But ultimately, if we hang our hat on what I am is this body mind, it's vulnerable. So I'd suggest, rather than asking how can I as a separate self realize unity, realize wholeness, to turn the question around and see that wholeness must be a fact, right? There's, surprising enough, there's even one existence, So if we can say that, yes, existence is whole, what am I believing that is preventing me from seeing that in this moment? So we can turn it around rather than hope for some future event to sort of catapult us into wholeness. We can just, it must be whole in this moment. So, what are we believing in this moment that's preventing us from seeing it? And like I said, I'd suggest that the primary thing is the belief in what I am is this body mind. And that belief is something that we can look at, because our experience of this body mind from the perspective of our thinking mind is obvious. Yes, this is what I am. I can see, I can look, I can touch, I can sense. This is what I am, right? But from awareness, how exactly is this body mind different from another body mind that I can perceive? I can perceive this body mind. I can observe it. I can sense it. I can be aware of it. And I can't sense into another person's body or their thoughts, but I can notice that. I can notice other forms, all as appearances within awareness. So from the perspective of awareness, everything appears within what I am. Much like from the perspective of mind, this body appears to be me. And there's an analogy here with the, with our actual physiology. When I've talked about this before, but when we say, well, I can see a tree, and our assumption is that I can actually experience that tree as being outside of myself. I can see the actual tree standing over there. But the reality, this is not philosophy, it's just physiology, but the reality is that that image only appears in our mind. It's a function of the object, the presence of the tree, the presence of sunlight reflected off the tree, entering our eyeballs, being transmitted electrically into our brain, that image reconstituting itself as a tree that the brain then recognizes, and something is aware of that, which we've been calling awareness. So all of that whole process, the actual image that's observed is wholly within what we are. And it only appears in this body mind that happens to be looking in that direction where the tree is. And it's only noticed by awareness. The whole thing, our entire experience of everything that has ever happened in our life is and always has appeared wholly within what we are. And when that is really fully understood, the significance of that, that sense of otherness really drops away, because then what is other exactly? And that sense of fear about being in the world drops away when we recognize that awareness itself, not being of the world of form, is actually beyond harm. And things in the world of form are vulnerable. Awareness is not. And when that recognition is what we are, then fear drops away. And when the recognition that the world appears within what we are, that sense of otherness drops away. So when nothing else is seen as other, where's the fear? Where's the anxiety? There's just a sense of at-homeness. It's not like this wholeness or unity is a mystical place in heaven. It's just the reality of our situation when we've stripped away all the beliefs otherwise. And when we say that it's all one existence, it really means nothing is excluded, right? Nothing at all is excluded. Not ourselves, not God. It's all one, it's all one. No separation. And from that perspective of awareness as the doorway, then all of that form that appears within that is actually not other than that same source, and not at all in any way separate from what we are. So 2 steps, just simple is good, simple is good, and trust your own direct experience. What's actually happening, rather than anything that we may have learned or just absorbed growing up about how things should be. As they are is what's actually important. Go with that.